Thank you so much, Ian. And yes, it is very much a new political landscape. It's amazing how just a couple of weeks can completely change the way that our political system is operating and the policy that we can expect. I would like to just talk about the results themselves quickly because it's only, well, it's barely actually 4 weeks, it's 3 weeks since the election actually happened. And one thing I would say is that these results are, oh, my cup of tea's just been delivered, even better. These results are deceptive, very deceptive. So this is a stunning, stunning win for Labour. I mean, there is no getting around that. The scale of the victory in Parliament is enormous. It's a majority of 170 seats. They've got 412 seats. This is kind of Blair level landslide kind of territory. And I think when I spoke last time, I talked about how these new modern polls were showing that Labour could possibly win very, very large. And it did, but it actually won in a different way to the way that the polls were anticipating. And that's because Labour's support is broad, but actually quite shallow. Their vote share at this election was only 33.7%. That's only 1.6% higher, or 1.6 points higher than Jeremy Corbyn got last time round. Okay, so this huge victory is not based on a stunning endorsement of Labour by the public. This is actually a pretty low vote share for a winning party. Really, what it is it's a story about the precipitous collapse of the Tory vote and the pretty strong showing of reform as well. So that's the first thing. Labour have won more or less two-thirds of the seats in Parliament based on 34% of the vote share. It was also a low turnout election, and a low turnout election means low enthusiasm. Like, I think we barely got to 60% turnout in this election, which is pretty low. So that's the first story. Now, Keir Starmer's not going to be complaining about that right now. He's got a huge majority and he can do more or less what he wants. But what I would just keep an eye on is, I don't want to talk about the next election already because it's 5 years and I think we've all had enough of elections. But we've gone from an 80-seat Tory majority in 2019 to a 172-seat majority from Labour within the course of basically 5 years. Things change really fast. The electorate's volatile. There's no loyalty, and this is not a ringing endorsement of Labour. This set of results, even though it looks like one. Okay, so the Conservatives. What about them? This performance was on not absolutely cataclysmic, but certainly on the worst end of expectations for them. 121 seats, 250 seats they've lost at this election. But what I will give you a sense of is some research that we've just done in our business, and it's not public yet, so please don't talk about it too much, but we will be talking about this. 75% of MPs in this parliament have got a majority of less than 10 or fewer than 10,000 votes. So what we've got is a country that is essentially marginal at the moment. About a half of the cabinet are in that category of MPs with a majority of fewer than 10,000. So if you look at a lot of these Tories that were dumped out, they were dumped out on quite small margins, like majorities of maybe a couple of thousand, 3,000 the other way. But nevertheless, it was a disastrous performance for the Conservatives, and they've lost vast swathes of the southwest of England, parts of the southeast, including seats close to where I am in Surrey, which should be absolutely rock solid for the Tories. And why is this? Well, partly it's because of the performance of Reform, although that's a slight oversimplification. Reform picked up 14.5% vote share and ended up with 5 seats. Now, the other story of this election is the outperformance of the Liberal Democrats, 72 seats, record performance of them. They picked up 600,000 fewer votes across the country than Reform did. More people, 500,000 more people, more than 500,000 more people voted for Reform than they did for the Liberal Democrats. So what you are also getting in this election is the way that our electoral system, our first past the post system, is pretty disproportional. Now, you might end up with this sort of strange situation where in the next few months or years, You have parties from the right, which traditionally are very anti-electoral reform, starting to say, well, maybe it's time we have a look at this again. The Scottish National Party got very badly beaten in Scotland by Labour. I think that's one thing that Labour will take as a major success, and maybe a long-term success, that Labour are back in Scotland, having been out of the game for pretty much a decade. And it's not impossible for Labour to be thinking about whether Anna Sarwar might actually become First Minister at the next Scottish elections. All right, so those are the results. I've said it about 3 times now, but I think this is really, really important. It is a stunning win for Labour, but that support is shallow, and it's wide, but it's shallow. What about Labour and government? And I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about that, and then I'll talk about the US quickly, maybe France. Labour is running fast. They know that they need to make an impact really, really quickly. Most of the individuals in office in the Secretary of State roles are those who were in those posts in opposition. So there's quite a lot of continuity. It looks like an awful lot of power is accumulating under Rachel Reeves. That relationship between Starmer and Reeves is critical. I think they want to model it on the kind of Cameron-Osborne relationship, where Reeves has actually quite a lot of latitude to run the domestic policy agenda, with Starmer absolutely very much being the Prime Minister. But I think her ability to drive the growth mission, which is core to them, is going to be pretty. It's going to be a big deal. They've stood up this growth mission board, and what's it focused on? It's focused on productive investment. So that's bringing assets from pensions into UK assets like green tech, into public infrastructure and all the rest of it. But there's also a big push on planning and planning reform, which I think is the area which they're staking a lot of emphasis on. And it is consistently Rachel Reeves that is announcing all of these policy changes. So I think what we can expect to see is this kind of huge wave of policy over the next 6 to 12 months. The King's Speech, which is the announcement of the government's agenda last week, had 40 bills in it, which is the biggest King's Speech we've seen for a very long time. So this session of Parliament is currently run for 2 years. And there'll just be this kind of conveyor belt of legislation. Generally, the relationship between Labour and business has been extremely warm. I think certainly the businesses that we work with are relieved to have a clear agenda, to have a government with a big majority. But this is the early days. And I think, as Labour are in government, they will make decisions that will test that relationship. It hasn't been tested yet, but I think it will do. And I think the thing to really look forward to is the budget, which will the date of which will be announced on Monday. And that will probably be in October. And that's going to be the point at which the rubber hits the road, because these are when Labour will have to start making hard choices about the finances. And just ahead of that, Rachel Reeves will publish on Monday as well a hatchet job on the public finances. So she's commissioned the Treasury to write this document that says this is how much the Tories screwed up the public finances. This is the huge list of problems that we've got to solve, and it's kind of what we call a pitch roll. She's rolling the pitch for tax rises and difficult decisions in the autumn, on the basis that, well, look, what else are we going to do? We're a responsible government. So I'll leave it there for the UK. The US is obviously, I was talking to my colleagues in the US yesterday. US campaigns are interminable. One campaign finishes, the next one starts. And nothing seems to happen. And then it all happens incredibly quickly. And I think we had a period of about 7 days where Donald Trump was nearly assassinated. Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the heir presumptive. And it happened incredibly quickly. It does look like Kamala is going to be the candidate. I think this sets up an extremely different race to the one that was sort of mooted between Biden and Trump, because there you had 2 old white guys, and now you have one who's an old white guy, and then this quite different younger woman with a mixed race background from California. So the nature of the race is is going to change, and I think that will be fascinating. The one thing that my colleagues in the US are saying is that they really don't think this election is going to be settled in November of next year, in November of this year. That they expect it to be heavily contested through the courts, and it's quite possible, therefore, that the result is not known for, well, almost up until the inauguration itself. So I think that's one thing to be mindful of, that it could be a very close election with lots of these states being contested. And then very, very briefly in France, my colleagues in France are working flat out. Those legislative elections have completely upended the scene in France. And I think where it's relevant for this group is that suddenly the UK seems to have gone from having a moron discount on it to having a stability premium. And that where the UK was politically this sort of odd outlier doing all of these strange things, it now has this sort of government with an enormous majority, almost certainly no election for another 5 years now, and a kind of normalized relationship with its international partners. So potentially the UK just becomes a more attractive investment prospect than it has been for some time. So